So hello and welcome to our first lesson in our course on dodging and burning here at Retouching Academy. So first off, thanks for joining me over the next couple of lessons where we're obviously going to take a pretty deep dive into the concept of dodging and burning. And you're probably wondering, why are we talking about dodging and burning? Why is this sort of one of the first lessons that we have within Retouching Academy? And the main reason for that is that dodging and burning is essentially a very important and powerful concept, and it's one that you really need to master in order to become a good retoucher. Now, conversely, if you are great at everything else in retouching with the exception of dodging and burning, your images are still not going to look very good because it is such an important concept. And so ultimately, the look and feel of your final product is just very heavily dictated by your ability to dodge and burn the image. Now, what are we going to be talking about in this series of lessons here? So, within this lesson and a little bit in the next one, we're going to be talking about some of the underlying theory behind dodging and burning, what it is, why it works, why it's important, and, how it compares to some of the other techniques that we have out there. And then, obviously, we're going to dive into sort of practical concepts within dodging and burning. And obviously, we're going to teach you how to dodge and burn using a couple of different examples and, a couple of different variations within the dodge and burn technique. And we're also going to look at a lot of, more detailed things like how do we work on features like lips or eyes, in addition to, just working on the overall image itself. So what is dodging and burning? Essentially, dodging and burning is the increasing and decreasing of luminosities within, particular areas. So we're going to sort of target an area and we're going to either lighten or brighten it. And that's really all it comes down to. Now, the image itself is composed of three elements. So that is hue, saturation, and luminosity. And obviously, dodging and burning affects the luminosity and to a lesser extent the saturation as well. So if we actually bring up our color picker over here, we see that this breaks down into those three elements. Now if we sample, let's say something on the cheek here, we see that the hue is denoted by this top to bottom slider over here, which you see a bunch of different colors on. And so obviously we have this sort of reddish orange color here as our hue. The saturation is left and right here, so we have most desaturated on the left and then most saturated on the right, and the luminosity, which is of course what we're targeting with dodging and burning, is this sort of up and down value. So as you can see here, very bright at the top and fully black down at the bottom. So why does dodging and burning help us make the image look so much better? Because effectively we're only targeting one of three elements. So how is it that it manages to actually work to produce an image that looks good? So if we look at something like this over here, we have this same image. Now this is sort of the image without any retouching. And so if we look at the image in color, we have this. We have our our colored image with some areas that we need to obviously work on. So if we take this off and we leave just the color elements, so just hue and saturation, this is what we essentially have. So this is our image as it is represented by color, effectively. So even though we saw things that were wrong with the image, things that we need to fix, can you really spot those issue areas here? I would say not so much. I mean, obviously we see color shifts where we should see color shifts. So we see a color shift in the eyes, right? Because the reason of that is that we have this eyeshadow here, which is a little bit pinkish. We see a change in color in the cheekbones because we have some blush there. We see changing color in the lips because obviously there was lipstick applied. And then generally the skin itself is sort of the same color throughout. The difference, of course, being this area down here and in the nose, which if we look at it here, is a slightly different color, and that's primarily because the luminosity shift is so large there as well. So you won't always get an even hue across areas where there's changes or dramatic changes in luminosity. Wherever the luminosity is sort of similar, you'll see that color, transitioning pretty well. I mean, we can see that, the forehead here, tied with this area, and then, the neck and body, it's generally fairly uniform. But where we have large shifts in luminosity, you're going to see larger differences as well. So obviously we have a huge highlight here, and so we don't really have any color because it's almost white. And then over here we have a very different hue because there's a strong shadow under the neck. So looking at that, we could obviously make changes to the color, but that's really not going to make a drastic change to the appearance of our image. Now, of course, if we make very drastic changes to the color, it'll certainly be noticeable, but those issues that we saw in this image here, so sort of, like patches like this, or, patches here, sort of lines around the neck, or whatever it may be, some lines here, things that we want to transition out and make it nice and smooth, we don't really see that in our color representation. So targeting color, as important as it is, and of course we have to address color shifts, it's not the main thing that our eye perceives as being sort of a problem area. If, on the other hand, we look at luminosity, this is sort of the image from a purely luminosity standpoint. So essentially what I've done here is I've got a black layer, and then I've got the image itself on luminosity blend mode. So I'm just kind of discarding the color information and just leaving the lightness and brightness values. So here, obviously, we can see those problem areas. I mean, the lines around the neck, they're still there, all these patches. And in fact, we can see them better because our eye is no longer distracted by the color elements. So that is kind of, at a very simple level, why dodging and burning works well, is because by fixing these issues on a luminosity level, the eye will no longer notice them, even when we're working with a color image. So there's essentially two flavors of dodging and burning that we're going to be covering within the lessons. And the first one is often referred to as local dodging and burning, or micro dodging and burning, although I think generally the term that I like to associate with it is more corrective dodging and burning. And the reason for that is that it's not really local in nature. I mean, it's local because we localize various areas on the subject. But for me, local is more of, sort of creating a stack for dodging and burning and then using that to target a particular area. So maybe I want to fix cracked lips, or I want to, transition eye makeup, or whatever it may be. That's me sort of working on one local area. Similarly, micro dodging and burning isn't really a good term for it either, because, let's say I want to fix something like these lines on the neck. I mean, would we really call that a micro dodge and burn? Probably not. It's not really a micro area. Micro dodging and burning, I think, would be something where you're working on, very specific bits of skin texture. So you have to zoom in 100, 200% and really kind of get in there and work on skin texture. That would, to me, seem like more of a micro kind of thing. And so that's why I generally like to call it corrective, because that's really what we're doing, is we're correcting issues within the skin or the subject that is best handled through dodging and burning. So I think for the purposes of the rest of this lesson, and the rest of these lessons, I should say, we'll be calling it corrective as opposed to anything else. So the next one is often referred to as global dodging and burning. So that's kind of, the converse of the local dodging and burning. And again, that's probably not the best description. I prefer to just call it contouring, because that's really what we're doing, is we're defining the contours of our subject. And so, we're going to be enhancing features like cheekbones, nose, lips, kind of clavicles, sort of these areas. So we're going to be using, the concept of lightening and darkening to create a little bit more depth, a little bit more dimension, and sort of make the image look more three-dimensional. So we're going to cover both concepts in separate lessons, and then we're going to look at something, which I've already mentioned, which is sort of the local dodging and burning, which is targeting specific things like lips. And how do we actually fix those? So those are kind of the two main things that we're going to be looking at in future lessons. But for now, before we actually dive into that, let's kind of talk about where dodging and burning fits in, and how it differs from something like, for example, frequency separation or inverted high pass. And the main reason that I like dodging and burning over a lot of those techniques is that those techniques are, in the end, they're just shortcuts. They're not really the ideal way to retouch an image. And the main reason for that is that they're quite destructive in nature. I mean, ultimately, when we look at frequency separation, so let's take a look and go into this image here. And so, with frequency separation, what we're doing is we're separating this image into high and low frequencies. So high frequencies being the skin texture. So if we go into here, we zoom in quite tightly, and we look at something like our eyebrows, that is a high frequency kind of piece of information. The texture and the skin is a high frequency piece of information. So basically, if we turn off our hide layers here, this is what we're left with. So, obviously we have a little bit of information in the brows because, of the particular radius that I chose for my frequency separation. But things like, for example, skin texture start to go away at this level because we put that in the hide layer. So when we try and fix things in frequency separation, we're generally doing it over top of the low layer. So we want to basically take this color. Let's just turn that off. So something like this, we just want to kind of make this color blend together. So we want to kind of bring this color into here, and then this color into here, and just kind of all blend together to create something that is smooth and uniform. And while that's fine, we can start to kind of paint in there. If we just grab our brush at let's say a 2% flow rate, and we start sampling and painting, we can see that we're gradually obviously going to get it there. We're going to keep kind of sampling, keep painting, and over time we're going to eventually blend all of this stuff together. So let's just kind of do that. Let's actually bring up our high layer so we see kind of the end product. And so, with very little time, we can kind of sort that out. So there's sort of the before and after, and we've just kind of fixed some of those shifts there. Now, that's all well and good, but ultimately the problem with that is that, as we're kind of painting through here, we're targeting all three elements at once. We're targeting the hue, the saturation, and the luminosity, when in reality, when we kind of saw that sample over here, the color was never a huge issue in that area. I mean, obviously there are some issues because saturation will change depending on the relative lightness and brightness of a particular area. But for the most part, we're not concerned with that. So let's just jump back to this image here. And so even though we've kind of fixed that, we fixed it in a sort of brute force way. We've gone in and started painting in new values for hue, saturation, and luminosity. And it's really not the best way to work because, first of all, what if I want to kind of scale that back? I can't really do that, especially once I've flattened my my frequency separation layer here. So let's say I'm done and I stamp this out, and this becomes my new kind of working layer. Even if I kind of keep both of these, it's very difficult to scale back certain areas, and ultimately, it is a destructive process when you're retouching to use frequency separation within your workflow. The main thing that really defines kind of the danger of frequency separation for me is just that we're doing an actual pixel replacement as opposed to a pixel adjustment. So anytime we're changing things, we're essentially painting in some new values in there. So we're arbitrarily choosing, this color and this luminosity, and we're going to put that value in the spot that we're painting. And the danger of that is because ultimately, I mean, at a certain point, you will start to deviate away from the original image. I mean, if I go into here and I grab, let's say this color over here. So we just grab this pinkish tone. Now, I mean, if I start painting this for long enough, I've got that whole new value in there. And, and that's not to say that really should be in there because it has... it no longer really has that representation of what the image was to begin with, because in a relative sense, we're not really keeping anything that's relative. We're actually just taking whatever we think is the right value and dropping it in there. Dodge and burn, on the other hand, has the benefit of allowing us to take what's there and either shift it one way or another. So we're preserving the original values, and we're simply just adjusting them, plus or minus. And that's where dodging and burning allows you to create a result that is just much more natural and much more true to the original image. And ultimately, as you kind of get good at dodging and burning, you'll find that it is, in a sense, easier than frequency separation because you don't have to be cognizant of the fact that, am I screwing up the original image? Am I kind of shifting away from what the image should be and what the contours of that subject face should look like? With dodging and burning, obviously, you can move away from that. You can make the image look worse, but with practice, you kind of learn the key areas to target, and of course, it just becomes much harder to destroy an image when you're just doing adjustments as opposed to replacements. So that was kind of a long-winded explanation, I guess, of why you should really use dodging and burning over frequency separation. But I think it's an important one to learn, because I think a lot of people incorrectly think that frequency separation is sort of this shortcut process for dodging and burning, and the more you do in frequency separation, the more it simplifies the dodging and burning process. And while that's true, obviously when you do a ton of frequency separation, the remaining elements that need to be fixed are much fewer, so you spend less time in dodging and burning. But I think the important point is that once you practice dodging and burning enough, you'll realize that addressing those initial issues using only dodging and burning really does not take that much more time than doing them within frequency separation, and that generally the results are much nicer and also much more natural looking.